My parents handed our empire to my brother after I refused arranged marriage, so I pulled the ground out from under their kingdom with one cold move. The arranged marriage proposal came with champagne and contracts, as if my consent was just another signature needed to close the deal. I sat in my father's mahogany-paneled office, watching him and my mother discuss my future like I was a stock option they were trading. "The Al Hussein family will expand our international reach," Victor explained, not bothering to meet my eyes. "Eloise understands her role in this." But I didn't understand. I never had. 27 years of being groomed as the perfect daughter, the ideal business asset, the obedient pawn in their corporate chess game, and they still didn't know me at all. When I said those 3 words that shattered their world, "I won't marry him," I watched my parents' faces transform from confidence to fury to something colder: calculation. They thought cutting me off, throwing me out, erasing me from their legacy like I never existed would break me. What they didn't realize was that some cages, no matter how gilded, eventually forge the very keys that unlock them. They wanted to write me out of their story, but I was about to become the author of my own. Growing up in the Wren household meant understanding that everything came with a price tag, including love. My name is Eloise Wren, and at 27 I finally learned that some prisons are built with gold bars and mahogany walls. The Wren Group dominated Chicago's architectural landscape for 3 generations. Our family estate sat on Lake Shore Drive like a monument to success. But inside those pristine walls, affection was as rare as a crooked line in our blueprints. My earliest memory isn't of birthday parties or bedtime stories. It's of standing perfectly still while my mother Celeste adjusted my posture for photographs. "Shoulders back, Eloise. You represent the family name." I was 4 years old. Every conversation in our house revolved around profit margins and strategic partnerships. My older brother Crispin absorbed it all, positioning himself as the heir apparent. Meanwhile, I learned that children were seen, not heard, and that my dreams mattered only if they served the Wren legacy. The arrangements began early: which friends I could have, daughters of business associates only, which activities I could pursue, nothing that interfered with family obligations. When I turned 16, Celeste showed me a portfolio of prospects, sons of business partners with the same hollow smiles I'd perfected. "What if I want to choose for myself?" I asked quietly. Celeste's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Choice is a luxury we can't afford. Everything we have depends on strategic alliances." Through high school and college, every milestone came with strings attached. My acceptance to Northwestern, perfect for networking. My internship at a rival firm, excellent intelligence gathering. I was never just Eloise. I was an asset with a pulse. The morning everything changed started like any other. Victor called me into his office at precisely 9 o'clock. Celeste sat across from his desk, her smile predatory. Between them stood a man I'd never seen, tall, olive-skinned, with kind eyes that seemed uncomfortable in the formal setting. "Eloise, meet Rami Al Hussein," Victor said without looking up. "You'll be married next spring." The words hit like a physical blow. Not engaged, married, as if the decision was already carved in stone. "Father, I think we should discuss." "There's nothing to discuss," Celeste interrupted. "The Al Hussein family controls shipping routes throughout the Mediterranean. This union will expand our reach internationally." "What about what I want?" Victor finally looked up, his steel gray eyes devoid of warmth. "You are the business, Eloise. Every opportunity we've given you comes with a price. This is that price." I turned to Rami, who was studying his hands. "And you're comfortable with this arrangement?" "I understand family obligations," he said quietly. "No," Celeste said sharply. "There's nothing private about family business. Rami should know that Eloise can be difficult, but she's well trained. She'll make a suitable wife once she accepts her responsibilities. Trained like a dog, like a business asset." "I'm not marrying a man I don't love," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The explosion was immediate. Victor erupted from his chair, his face purple with rage. "Love? You think love built this empire? Love pays for your designer clothes and fancy education? Maybe I just want what everyone else gets to choose." Everyone else doesn't have what we have. Victor slammed his fist on the desk. You think you can just walk away from everything we've built? The manipulation that followed was masterful. They twisted every conversation to make me the villain, used guilt like a weapon, made love seem like weakness rather than a basic human need. Get Crispin in here, Victor barked. My brother appeared within minutes, taking one look at the scene before his expression shifted to practiced concern. What's the problem? Your sister has decided to destroy 3 decades of planning, Celeste said. She's refusing the Al Hussein arrangement. Crispin's eyes lit up with something that might have been relief. Eloise, you can't be serious. This partnership is crucial for our expansion. Since when do you speak for me? Since you've proven you can't think beyond your own selfish desires, he replied smoothly. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Whose greater good? Victor had been making phone calls during our exchange. When he hung up, his expression was glacial. I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. We'll announce the engagement then. You can announce an engagement without a bride. Watch me. The next evening, our estate was transformed for what Celeste called an intimate family gathering. 200 of Chicago's most influential people filled our ballroom. I stood near the windows in a black dress I'd chosen because it felt like armor. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor's voice boomed across the room. Tonight, I'm thrilled to announce that my daughter Eloise will be marrying Rami Al Hussein this spring, uniting 2 great families. The applause was enthusiastic. I felt every eye turn toward me, expecting the gracious smile, the modest blush, the perfect performance I'd been trained to give. I'm not getting married, I said, my voice carrying farther than intended. The silence was immediate and complete. 200 people held their breath. Victor's face went white, then red, then back to white. Eloise is being modest, Celeste said with a laugh like breaking glass. She's overwhelmed by the attention. I'm not shy, I said louder. And I'm not getting married. Not to anyone you choose for me. I'm done being a business asset with a pulse. The whispers started immediately. Phones appeared. Social media posts were typed. By morning, this would be all over Chicago's society pages. Rami appeared at my elbow. Miss Wren, perhaps we could speak privately. We slipped onto the terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. The October air was sharp and clean after the suffocating atmosphere inside. You don't want this either, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. My father made similar arguments to yours: family honor, business, necessity. He turned to look at me. But I've seen what happens to people who marry for strategy instead of love. My parents were never cruel to each other, but they were never happy either. Then why didn't you say something? Because my family's business is failing. This partnership could save hundreds of jobs. Your father's backing could stabilize our operations for decades. He paused. But I didn't know the cost would be your happiness or mine. Your father has made it clear that backing out would have consequences, financial ones, legal ones. He could make things very difficult for my family's business interests in America. Threats. Of course there were threats. I'm sorry you're being used too, I said. Rami studied my face in the moonlight. You know, I think we might have been friends in different circumstances. You have kind eyes. That's rare in our world. He left that night, disappearing into a waiting car. I understood his message. He was removing himself from the equation. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Victor and Celeste didn't speak to me for 3 days, communicating only through Crispin. The silent treatment was one of their oldest weapons. On the 4th day, Victor appeared in my bedroom doorway while I was packing. Going somewhere? I think it's best if I stay somewhere else. Somewhere else. He stepped closer. Your credit cards are tied to family accounts. Your car is registered under the company. Your apartment comes with a lease requiring our signature. I continued packing with hands that barely trembled. I'll figure it out. Will you? Because I've been thinking about your little performance, about the embarrassment you caused, about the contracts we've lost because of your selfishness. How many contracts? 3 so far. The Thompson development fell through this morning. Some clients are concerned about the Wren family's stability. The guilt hit like a physical blow, just as he'd intended. But I forced myself to remember the alternative, a lifetime of being traded like a commodity. I'm sorry people lost their jobs. But I won't be sorry for refusing to sell myself to save them. Victor's mask finally slipped. You ungrateful little, do you have any idea what your mother and I have sacrificed for you? You've given me a cage. A beautiful, expensive cage, but still a cage. And now you want out. Fine. But you'll leave with nothing. Not a penny of family money. Not a connection in this city. Not even the clothes on your back if they were bought with our money. He pointed to my throat. The necklace. My mother's necklace. Take it off. My hand went to the delicate silver chain holding my grandmother's vintage pendant. She'd given it to me on her deathbed, the only person who'd ever shown me unconditional love. No, it belongs to the family. You're no longer family. She gave it to me specifically. It's mine. Victor pulled out his phone. Security. I need an escort to the front gate. My daughter is leaving. He smiled with pure venom. You have 10 minutes. The security guards were polite but firm as they watched me pack. I took only what I could carry, clothes I'd bought with my own money, books, and personal items. Everything else stayed behind. Celeste appeared as I walked toward the door. For a moment I thought she might say something. Instead she said, "You'll regret this, Eloise. When you're sleeping in shelters and begging for work, remember that you chose this." I stopped and turned. You know what I'll regret? That it took me 27 years to realize you never loved me. Not once. I was just another asset in your portfolio. Her face went white, but she didn't deny it. You'll regret this, I said, borrowing her words. All of you will regret this. The first night alone was the hardest. I used money from a secret savings account to book a room at a modest motel. The contrast between the worn carpet and the luxury I'd known was jarring. But for the first time in my life I was free to make my own choices. I spread my grandmother's belongings on the bed, jewelry, photographs, and a letter I had never opened. Inside, her words were like a lifeline. My dearest Eloise, if you're reading this, you've probably discovered what I learned too late, that our family sees love as weakness and control as strength. But there are things they don't know, secrets I've kept to protect you. Look for Gareth Molden. He has documents that will change everything. Trust yourself, my darling girl. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. At the bottom was an address and phone number. The next morning I called. An elderly man answered after several rings. Gareth Molden speaking. Mr. Molden, my name is Eloise Wren. I think you knew my grandmother. There was a long pause. Eloise, my dear girl, I've been waiting for your call for 15 years. Gareth Molden's law office existed in a different world from the sleek corporate towers where the Wren Group conducted business. Located in a converted brownstone, it felt like stepping back in time. Leather-bound books lined the walls, and the scent of old paper hung in the air. Gareth himself was exactly what I'd expected, mid-70s with wild white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He welcomed me with the warmth of someone greeting a long-lost relative. Eleanor spoke of you constantly, he said, settling into a worn leather chair. She was so proud of your intelligence, your spirit. She was also deeply worried about what would happen when she was no longer there to protect you. Protect me from what? From your parents' ambitions, from a family that sees people as chess pieces. He pulled out a thick manila folder. Your grandmother was remarkable, Eloise, much smarter than Victor ever gave her credit for. She saw what was coming long before you were born. The documents inside made my head spin, legal papers dating back decades, land deeds, financial records that painted a different picture of the Wren family's rise to power. This property here was supposed to be a nature preserve, Gareth pointed to a survey map. Your great-grandfather bought it without understanding. He showed me aerial photographs. The Wren Group built their flagship development right on protected wetlands. That's illegal. Very illegal. Your grandmother documented everything. She spent years collecting evidence, hoping she'd never have to use it. He handed me another document. This is what you really need to see. It was a trust document dated 3 years ago. My grandmother had quietly transferred significant land holdings into a trust with a specific provision. If the Wren family ever formally disowned Eloise Wren, she would gain controlling interest in properties worth $12 million. She knew, I whispered. She suspected. Eleanor was an excellent judge of character. She wanted to make sure you had options. The properties included several lots where the Wren Group had built major developments. If I activated the trust, I would own the ground beneath some of Chicago's most expensive buildings. What would happen if I claimed these properties? That would depend on whether the Wren Group has been paying their ground lease fees properly. Based on their accounting practices, I have my doubts. For the first time since leaving home, I felt possibility instead of despair. But claiming my inheritance would take time, and I needed to survive. My savings wouldn't last long in Chicago. I need work, I told Gareth, something that won't connect back to the Wren name. I might have an idea about that too. 3 days later I was sitting in the offices of Meridian Properties, a mid-sized firm specializing in sustainable housing. The owner, Delaney Rowe, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built her company after leaving a corporate job that had nearly destroyed her soul. Gareth says you have experience in development, she said, reviewing my hastily assembled resume under my new identity, L. Winters. I've been involved in the family business since I was young, but I'm looking for a fresh start. Family business can be complicated. I take it there was a falling out. You could say that. Well, L. Winters, I don't care about your past as long as you can do the job. The pay isn't glamorous, but the work is honest. Interested? Working at Meridian was like discovering I'd been holding my breath for 27 years. The projects were smaller than what I'd grown up around, but they mattered in ways the Wren Group's luxury developments never had: affordable housing for families, renovated buildings that preserved character while meeting modern needs. My colleagues were nothing like the cutthroat executives I'd known. Lucia Martinez was a paralegal and single mother whose quick wit reminded me of the sister I'd never had. Her teenage daughter, Rosa, was brilliant but rebellious, constantly challenging authority. She gets that from me, Lucia admitted one evening. I've never been good at accepting things just because someone in power says that's how it has to be. Then there was Trent Sullivan, a financial analyst who joined after getting clean from addiction. He had a quiet intensity that came from having looked into the abyss and chosen to climb back out. The thing about hitting bottom, he told me during a coffee break, is that you finally stop being afraid of falling. Once you know you can survive the worst, everything else becomes manageable. For the first time I was earning respect based on my work rather than my last name. Delaney began giving me more responsibility, praising my instincts for design and client relationships. 6 months in, she offered me a junior partnership. You have something special, Elle, an understanding of what people really need from their homes. That's rare in this business. But even as I built this new life, I couldn't escape my past. Gareth and I met regularly to plan activating my grandmother's trust, gathering documentation to prove my claim. The more we dug into the Wren Group's records, the more irregularities we found. Your father has been playing fast and loose with permit fees for years, Gareth explained. And some contractor payments don't add up. I think there's been systematic skimming. Crispin, I said immediately. He's been handling finances for 5 years. We found confirmation in a hidden ledger I discovered in my grandmother's old music box. The ornate box had seemed like a sentimental keepsake, but when I accidentally triggered a hidden mechanism, a false bottom revealed a notebook in my grandmother's handwriting. The entries documented conversations overheard, meetings interrupted, financial discrepancies noticed while helping with bookkeeping. The picture was damning. Victor knew about illegal building practices and actively covered them up. Crispin had been embezzling for years. Celeste had been blackmailing business associates using information gathered at social events. They're criminals, I said, staring at the evidence. All of them. The question is, what do you want to do about it? What I wanted was justice. What I needed was leverage. We wait, I decided. Let me get stronger first. When I come for them, I want to be unshakable. But waiting became complicated when Lucia almost died. It happened on a Tuesday evening in November. She was walking home when a car ran a red light and nearly struck her. Only quick reflexes saved her life as she dove behind a parked car. The police called it an accident, but something felt wrong. The car had been traveling too fast, made no attempt to brake, and witnesses said it looked intentional. Someone's been asking questions about you at work, Trent told me the next day. A man in an expensive suit claiming to be from insurance. Delaney thought it was weird because we don't have any pending claims. I was being watched. Somehow my family had found me, and they were sending a message: stay quiet or people you care about will get hurt. The next few weeks required delicate balance, advancing our legal strategy while protecting the people I'd grown to love. I convinced Lucia to take Rosa on vacation to California using money I could barely afford. I started varying my routes to work, checking for surveillance. The breakthrough came from Trent. He approached me after work one evening, his expression serious. I need to tell you something about my past, about why I really came to work at Meridian. We went to a quiet bar where Trent ordered coffee instead of alcohol, a recovery habit, and stared into the cup before speaking. I used to work for the Wren Group about 8 years ago, before I got clean. I was their guy for moving money around without attracting attention. Crispin Wren specifically. My heart stopped. You worked for my brother? He looked up sharply. Your brother? What aren't you telling me? The moment of truth had arrived. I could keep lying and lose the trust of someone who might help me, or take the biggest risk of my life. My name isn't Elle Winters, I said quietly. It's Eloise Wren. The silence stretched between us. Trent's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and understanding. Jesus, you're Victor Wren's daughter. The one who refused the arranged marriage. Yes, that's me. The man asking questions at work, that wasn't insurance. Probably one of your father's investigators. Or worse, someone Crispin hired to keep you quiet. I told him everything: the illegal developments, the embezzlement, the blackmail, my grandmother's evidence, the trust fund that could destroy their empire. Crispin's worse than you think, Trent said when I finished. The money laundering wasn't just skimming. He was taking payments from contractors using substandard materials, then covering up building code violations. People could have died, could still die. There was a residential building in Evanston. Families with children. The electrical work was so shoddy it should have burned down within a year. I tried to back out after that job. Crispin threatened to have me killed. Did you believe him? I was a junkie, paranoid about everything. But looking back, yeah, I think he would have done it. Your brother isn't just greedy. He's dangerous. Over the following days, Trent became my secret weapon. His knowledge of the Wren Group's operations, combined with my grandmother's evidence and Gareth's legal expertise, formed a comprehensive picture of criminal activity spanning decades. Look at this, Trent said, pointing to bank statements he'd obtained through old contacts. Crispin's been creating shell companies to bid on city contracts, then awarding them to himself. Classic bid rigging. Can we prove it with the right documentation? Absolutely. But we need testimony from people who were involved. That's when I thought of Julian Crane. Julian had worked for the Wren Group for 15 years before being fired for what Victor called insubordination. I remembered the incident. Julian had raised concerns about corner cutting on a public school renovation, questions that made Crispin uncomfortable enough to demand his removal. Finding Julian wasn't difficult. He'd started his own firm specializing in sustainable design, working out of a converted warehouse. When I walked into his office using my real name for the first time in months, his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Eloise Wren. I heard you disappeared. I heard you got fired for having a conscience. He laughed without humor. Your family doesn't appreciate inconvenient questions. How's that working out for you? About as well as you'd expect. Julian, I need to ask you about the Roosevelt Elementary project, the one that got you fired. His expression grew cautious. That's ancient history. And frankly, I'm not sure I trust anyone with the last name Ren. I spent the next hour telling Julian about my situation, showing him the evidence Gareth and I had compiled. Slowly his skepticism gave way to hope. You're really going after them? I'm really going after them. But I need people who were there, who saw what happened. Julian was quiet, staring out at the Chicago skyline where Ren Group buildings dominated the horizon. Finally he turned back to me. The Roosevelt Project wasn't just about cutting corners. Your brother was taking kickbacks from a contractor known for using immigrant workers at below minimum wage. When I tried to report it, Crispin told me that if I didn't keep quiet, he'd make sure I never worked in Chicago again. Did he follow through? For 3 years. Yeah. No one would hire me. My reputation was trashed through whisper campaigns. I almost lost my house. His voice hardened. But I kept documentation, photos, emails, recorded conversations. I'd been waiting for someone to care enough to listen. The anonymous whistleblowing started small, a tip to the planning department about permit irregularities, an anonymous email to a journalist about questionable contractor relationships, nothing traceable to me, but enough to raise uncomfortable questions. The results were immediate. The Ren Group lost a major government contract when the city decided to review their practices. A banking partner pulled out, citing regulatory concerns. Stock prices fluctuated as investors grew nervous. I watched it unfold from my apartment, reading news coverage while sipping coffee from a chipped mug. Each small victory felt like a step toward justice. Victor's paranoia became front-page news when he fired 3 executives in a week, claiming they were leaking information. Crispin was promoted to CEO in what analysts called a panic-driven reorganization. They're cracking, Trent observed during one of our strategy sessions. Victor's always been controlling, but this level of paranoia is new. Good. Scared people make mistakes. But scared people also become more dangerous. The message came through Lucia, who'd returned from California only to find herself caught in my war. She called at 2 a.m, voice shaking. Eloise, someone broke into my apartment. I was there within 20 minutes, finding her and Rosa huddled on the couch while police dusted for fingerprints. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear: family photos scattered, Rosa's laptop smashed, stop spray painted on the bathroom mirror. This is about you, isn't it? Lucia said when the police left. I couldn't lie anymore. Yes, and I'm sorry. Who are you really? So I told her everything. Lucia's reaction was anger, but not at me, at them. Those bastards using arranged marriage to control you, then throwing you away when you wouldn't comply. Now they're threatening my daughter to keep you quiet. I'll understand if you want me to stay away. Like hell, Rosa interrupted. Mom, tell her. Lucia smiled for the first time that night. Running away just lets them win. But if we're going to fight, we need to be smart. We? You think I'm going to let some rich assholes threaten my kid? Besides, I'm a paralegal. I know how to research legal documents. You're going to need help. Having Lucia officially join changed everything. Her legal knowledge complemented Gareth's experience, and her court system connections proved invaluable as we laid groundwork for a comprehensive assault on the Ren Group. But first we needed more ammunition. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Rami al-Hussein. Trent had been monitoring international news about the al-Hussein family business, trying to understand what leverage Victor might have used. What he found was disturbing. Rami's shipping company was under investigation for sanctions violations, and American companies doing business with them could face significant legal exposure. Your father wasn't just threatening Rami's business, Trent explained. He was threatening to expose them to federal prosecutors. That's why Rami couldn't say no. But Rami left. He's been in Europe for months. That's what I thought until I saw this. Trent handed me emails he'd found buried in the Ren Group server. The messages were between Victor and Crispin discussing the al-Hussein problem and maintaining pressure even after Rami's departure. They'd been blackmailing his family this entire time. The final email, sent 2 weeks ago, contained one line from Crispin to Victor: Al Hussein situation resolved. No further complications expected. We need to find Rami first. Through Julian's architectural network, we located him in Geneva. After 3 days of calls and favors, Julian made contact. He's alive but scared. Been receiving threats for months. My contact says he's barely willing to talk. Can you get him a message? What do you want to say? I thought about the kind man who'd understood my situation, who'd removed himself from an impossible equation to give me freedom. Tell him Eloise Wren is fighting back. If he's willing to help, she has a plan. The response came within hours, a secure email address and a time for a video call. Seeing Rami's face on my laptop brought back memories from that terrible night. He looked older, more careworn, with shadows under his eyes. Eloise, he said warmly despite the circumstances. I heard what happened. I am sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. They've been threatening your family for months, haven't they? His expression darkened. How did you know? Because I've learned that's what my family does. They find your weakness and squeeze until you give them what they want. But I think I found a way to stop them. I outlined our plan, the evidence we'd compiled, Gareth's legal strategy, media contacts already asking questions. What we needed was testimony about the family's coercion methods. Your father made specific threats, Rami said, about exposing my family's business, making sure we could never operate in U.S. markets. He said marriage to you was the only guarantee of protection. Are you willing to testify to that? If it will stop them from hurting others, yes. But once I go public, there's no going back. Your family will know you're behind it. Good. I want them to know it's me. The pieces were falling into place, but our window was closing. Victor's paranoia was reaching dangerous levels, and Crispin's desperation was making him reckless. There's something else, Gareth told me during our final planning meeting. Your father's been working with expensive lawyers. I think he's preparing for war. What kind of war? The kind where he tries to have you declared mentally incompetent, claims you're suffering from delusions, that your accusations are products of psychological breakdown from rejecting family values. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. If Victor could convince a court I was mentally unstable, my testimony would be worthless and my access to grandmother's trust could be blocked indefinitely. How long do we have? Days, maybe a week. Once he files those papers, everything becomes more complicated. That night I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment, I decided to go public with everything we had. Are you sure? Lucia asked as we prepared the media packet that would destroy my family's empire. I've been taking it back my whole life. I'm done being quiet. I'm done being scared. They want a war? They'll get one. The next morning I walked into the Chicago Tribune offices and told them I was ready to tell my story. But first I had one last piece of business. I drove to Wren Group headquarters, parked across the street, and called my father's direct line. This is Eloise. Tell him his daughter would like to speak. The pause was so long I thought the secretary had hung up. Finally, please hold. Victor's voice was colder than Lake Michigan in January. Eloise, I heard you've been making interesting new friends. You could say that. I've also been making interesting discoveries. Have you? And what might those be? Tomorrow's newspaper will explain everything. I just wanted fair warning. Warning about what? That your daughter isn't the weak little girl you thought you raised. And that some cages, no matter how beautiful, can't hold someone who's finally learned how strong she really is. I hung up before he could respond. The story would break in 12 hours. By then there would be no going back for any of us. The story broke at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday that would change everything. My phone started buzzing before I was fully awake. When I checked the news, the headline made my heart race: Chicago architecture dynasty built on lies, Wren Group whistleblower reveals decades of corruption. The Chicago Tribune had done their homework. The front page featured a photo of the Wren Group headquarters alongside a smaller image of me from my college graduation, the last family photo where I'd looked genuinely happy. The article laid out everything we'd given them: the illegal wetlands development, the bid rigging, the worker exploitation, the blackmail schemes. But seeing it in print felt different than planning it. This was real now. There was no taking it back. My phone rang constantly, reporters, former colleagues, even people I'd known in college reaching out with support or seeking details. I turned it off after the 20th call and drove to Gareth's office, where we'd agreed to monitor the fallout together. The IRS is already moving, Gareth told me when I arrived. They've had an investigation into the Wren Group's tax practices on the back burner for months. Your evidence gave them everything they needed to escalate. How fast will they move? Federal agents could be at their headquarters by noon. The thought of Victor and Crispin being led away in handcuffs should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like watching a building collapse, necessary, but destructive in ways that would affect innocent people too. Second thoughts? Gareth asked, reading my expression. No, but I keep thinking about the employees who will lose their jobs, the clients whose projects will be delayed, people who had nothing to do with my family's crimes. That's what makes you different from them, Eloise. You consider the collateral damage. They never did. By 10 o'clock, news vans were surrounding the Wren Group building. By 11, trading on their stock was suspended pending investigation. By noon, as Gareth had predicted, federal agents were carrying boxes of evidence out the front doors. I watched it all unfold on the news from Gareth's office, feeling like I was observing someone else's life. The reporter spoke about shocking allegations and a family dynasty in ruins, but they couldn't capture the complexity of what this meant. Yes, I was exposing criminals, but I was also destroying the only family I'd ever known, flawed as they were. Eloise. Lucia appeared in the doorway, Rosa beside her. We saw the news. How are you holding up? I honestly don't know. Rosa, who'd been quiet since they arrived, suddenly spoke up. My mom told me what your family did to you, what they tried to do to us. She looked directly at me with a fierce intensity only teenagers could muster. You're a badass for fighting back despite everything. I laughed. Thank you, Rosa. That might be the best compliment I've ever received. The afternoon brought the first direct retaliation. Celeste appeared at a hastily arranged press conference outside the family estate, looking every inch the grieving matriarch in a black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. My daughter is a troubled young woman, she told the assembled reporters, her voice perfectly calibrated to convey both sadness and strength. She's always struggled with reality, with accepting responsibility for her actions. When she refused to honor her commitments to the family business, she began constructing elaborate fantasies to justify her behavior. The performance was masterful. Celeste painted me as mentally unstable, someone whose accusations were the product of delusion rather than evidence. She spoke about getting Eloise the help she needs and protecting her from exploitation by people seeking to use her illness for their own gain. She's good, Trent observed as we watched the coverage. She's making you sound like the villain in your own story. That's what she's always done. The difference is, this time I have proof. But Celeste's strategy was more dangerous than simple character assassination. Within hours I received a legal notice that Victor was petitioning the court for a psychiatric evaluation, claiming I was a danger to myself and others. If successful, it would not only undermine my credibility but could potentially lock me away while they worked to discredit all our evidence. This is serious, Gareth warned. Mental competency challenges are difficult to fight, especially when they come from family members claiming concern for your welfare. What do we need to do? We need to prove you're not only sane but that you have legitimate grievances backed by solid evidence. And we need to do it fast. That evening, as I sat in my small apartment trying to process the day's events, I heard a knock at the door. Through the peephole I saw a woman I'd hoped never to encounter again. Celeste, standing in my hallway like she owned it. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Mother. Eloise. Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years, almost vulnerable. May I come in? We need to talk. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Celeste entered my modest apartment, her sharp eyes taking in the second-hand furniture and cramped space with barely concealed disdain. "This is what you chose over your family. This is what you forced me to choose when you made it clear I was never really family, just a business asset." She was quiet for a moment, studying a framed photo of me with Lucia and Rosa, the closest thing to a family portrait I'd had in years. "You were always my most stubborn child," she said finally. "Even as a baby you refused to do anything you didn't want to do. I thought we could train it out of you, channel that strength into something useful for the family. You thought you could break me. I thought I could shape you." She turned to face me. "But you've proven me wrong, haven't you? You've certainly shaped yourself." For a moment I glimpsed something in her expression that might have been regret. Or maybe just calculation. "Why are you here, Celeste?" "To offer you a deal. Drop the allegations, agree to a quiet psychiatric evaluation that will find you temporarily unstable due to stress, and when you're recovered you can return to the family with a generous trust fund and no questions asked." "And if I refuse?" Her mask slipped back into place. "Then we'll destroy you completely. Not just your credibility but your new life, your friends, everything you've built. We have resources you can't imagine, Eloise. We can make you disappear." I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me but never truly been my mother, who even now was trying to manipulate and control rather than simply apologize or acknowledge the harm she'd caused. "Get out," I said quietly. "Eloise, get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. You made your choice when you threw me away. Now live with it." Celeste's composure cracked for just an instant, revealing something that might have been actual pain. Then the mask returned. "You'll regret this. When you're alone and broken and have nothing left, remember that I offered you a way back. I already have everything I need. I have people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them. You wouldn't understand that." She left without another word. But I knew this was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious spectators, and nervous-looking Rim Group employees unsure whether they'd have jobs by the end of the week. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Gareth, trying to project competence while my stomach churned with anxiety. The psychiatric evaluation Victor had demanded was scheduled for the following week, but our legal team had managed to expedite a hearing on the core allegations. If we could prove the substance of our case quickly, it would be much harder for them to claim my accusations were the product of mental illness. Victor sat across the aisle, looking older than I remembered but still commanding in his expensive suit. Crispin was beside him, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Celeste had positioned herself in the front row behind them, every inch the supportive family matriarch. They'd hired the best legal team money could buy, led by Margaret Whitfield, a legendary defense attorney known for destroying plaintiffs' credibility. I watched her organize her materials with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. "Remember," Gareth whispered to me, "stick to the facts. Don't let them provoke you into emotional responses. Our evidence speaks for itself." The first day was brutal. Whitfield systematically attacked every piece of documentation we'd presented, suggesting they were either fabricated or misinterpreted by someone with no real understanding of complex business operations. "Miss Wren," she said during her opening statement, "is a young woman who grew up privileged but never learned responsibility. When asked to contribute to the family business through a strategic marriage, a common practice among wealthy families for centuries, she chose instead to construct elaborate conspiracies to avoid her obligations. She painted me as spoiled, delusional, and vindictive, someone who'd rather destroy innocent people's livelihoods than accept adult responsibilities. It was character assassination disguised as legal argument, but we had prepared for this. Your Honor," Gareth said in his turn, "we'll be presenting testimony from multiple witnesses, physical evidence spanning decades, and financial records that paint a clear picture of systematic criminal activity. Miss Wren's personal grievances are secondary to the public interest in exposing these crimes." Our first witness was Julian Crane. He took the stand with quiet dignity, his architect's precision evident as he methodically described the safety violations and worker exploitation he'd witnessed during his 15 years with the company. When I tried to report these violations, I was told by Crispin Wren that if I didn't learn to see the bigger picture, I would find myself unemployed and unemployable in Chicago, Julian testified. I was threatened with personal and professional destruction for trying to protect children who would attend the school we were building. Whitfield's cross-examination was vicious. She questioned Julian's memory, his motivations, even his competence as an architect. But Julian held firm, supported by the documentation he'd carefully preserved. The second day brought Trent to the stand. His testimony about the money laundering operation was devastating, but Whitfield was ready for him too. "Mr. Sullivan, isn't it true that you were a drug addict during the time you claimed to have worked for the Wren Group?" "Yes." "And isn't it possible that your recollections are compromised by substance abuse?" "My addiction affected my judgment about participating in illegal activities," Trent replied calmly. "It didn't affect my ability to keep accurate records or remember what I witnessed." But the real bombshell came on the third day when Rami al-Hussein appeared via video link from Geneva. His testimony about the coercion and threats surrounding our arranged engagement sent shocked murmurs through the courtroom. Mr. Victor Wren made it very clear that if I did not marry his daughter, he would use his influence to expose my family's business to federal investigators and ensure we could never operate in American markets again, Rami testified, his accented English carrying clearly through the courtroom speakers. "Did you want to marry Miss Wren?" our attorney asked. "I barely knew Miss Wren. The marriage was purely a business arrangement to protect both our families' interests. When she refused, I respected her courage and removed myself from the situation." "Did the threats against your family continue after you left America?" "Yes. For months we received messages through intermediaries making it clear that the Wren family's influence could still reach us. The threats only stopped when this investigation became public." Whitfield tried to suggest that Rami was lying to avoid his own legal troubles, but his calm demeanor and detailed documentation made him a credible witness. "The turning point came when Gareth called me to the stand. 'Miss Wren, tell the court about your childhood relationship with your family.' I had rehearsed this moment countless times. But sitting in that witness chair, facing the people who'd shaped my entire life, the words came from a deeper place than preparation. I was never a daughter to them. I was an investment. From the time I could walk I was being groomed for strategic value. My education, my friendships, my interests, everything was filtered through what would benefit the family business." "Can you describe the arranged marriage your parents proposed?" "They didn't propose it, they announced it. I met Rami al-Hussein for the first time the day they told me I would marry him. When I refused, they made it clear that my value to the family was entirely dependent on my compliance." "What happened when you continued to refuse?" "They disowned me completely, cut off all financial support, had me physically removed from the family home, and began a campaign to isolate me from anyone who might help me." Whitfield's cross-examination was everything I'd expected and feared. She tried to portray me as an ungrateful child who turned on her loving family out of spite. "Miss Wren, isn't it true that your parents provided you with every possible advantage? Private schools, college education, travel opportunities, they provided those things, yes, but not out of love. Out of investment in my future utility to them. And when they asked you to contribute to the family business through marriage, a practice common among wealthy families, you refused. They didn't ask, they demanded. And yes, I refused to sell myself to preserve their business relationships. Isn't it possible that your current allegations are motivated by revenge rather than genuine concern for justice?" I looked across the courtroom at Victor, whose steel-gray eyes held the same cold calculation I'd known my entire life. Then at Celeste, who sat perfectly composed as if watching a mildly interesting theater performance. Finally at Crispin, whose expression was pure hatred. "If I wanted revenge," I said quietly, "I would have exposed their crimes years ago when I first discovered them. I'm here because they forced me to be here, because they threaten people I care about to keep me quiet, because their corruption affects innocent people who deserve better." The final witness was the most devastating. Gareth presented video testimony from my grandmother, recorded shortly before her death and kept sealed until now. Eleanor Wren's voice filled the courtroom from beyond the grave, speaking with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. If this recording is being played, it means my family has chosen power over truth once again. For decades I watched my son Victor and his wife corrupt everything my husband built. I documented their crimes because I hoped, that someday they would remember their conscience. But I also knew that if they didn't, someone would need to hold them accountable. The recording detailed specific incidents of fraud, bribery, and intimidation spanning 30 years. Eleanor had been the perfect witness, present for family meetings, privy to private conversations, and possessed of the kind of detailed memory that comes from a lifetime of careful observation. My granddaughter Eloise represents everything good about our family legacy. If she is fighting them, it's because they have left her no choice. Trust her, she has the strength I never had to do what's right. When the recording ended, the courtroom was silent. Even Whitfield seemed shaken by the testimony of a woman who could not be cross-examined, could not be intimidated, and whose love for me was evident in every word. The trial concluded with closing arguments that felt almost anticlimactic after Eleanor's testimony. Gareth summarized our evidence methodically, building an overwhelming case for systematic criminal activity. Whitfield made one last attempt to paint me as a vindictive daughter, but the mountain of evidence made her arguments sound desperate. Victor took the stand on the final day in what his lawyers probably thought was a strategic move but turned out to be a fatal mistake. Mr. Wren, his own attorney asked, "How do you respond to these allegations against your family's business?" "They're lies," Victor said firmly, "fabrications created by a disturbed young woman who can't accept that actions have consequences." But under cross-examination Victor's composure cracked. Gareth methodically walked him through financial documents, permit applications, and recorded conversations. When confronted with his own voice on a recording discussing keeping the Al-Hussein family in line, Victor's face went ashen. "That conversation was taken out of context," he said weakly. "What context would make threatening a business partner's family acceptable, Mr. Wren?" Victor had no answer. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady and clear. "We find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." But the real victory came moments later when the judge addressed the courtroom. "This case has revealed a pattern of criminal behavior that demands immediate action. I am referring this matter to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation. Furthermore, I am dismissing the petition for psychiatric evaluation of Miss Wren. Anyone who could compile this level of evidence and present it this coherently is clearly competent to handle her own affairs." As we left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. But I only had eyes for the people who'd stood by me: Gareth, Lucia, Rosa, Trent, and Julian. They were my real family now. Crispin was arrested the next morning on federal charges. As the police led him away in handcuffs, he screamed across the courthouse steps, "You'll never be one of us. You'll never be anything." He was right. And I'd never been more grateful for anything in my life. 6 months after the trial, I stood in the lobby of a gleaming new office building in downtown Chicago. The brass nameplate beside the elevator read "Wren Rebuild, Ethical Development for a Better Future." It was smaller than the Wren Group's old headquarters, but it was mine. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd ended up in the family business after all, just not the way anyone had expected. "The Turner project is ahead of schedule," Lucia reported, walking into my office with a stack of permits and a satisfied smile. "The family should be able to move into their new homes by Christmas." Lucia had completed her law degree with financial help from the foundation I'd established with my grandmother's trust money. She was now my general counsel, bringing the same fierce intelligence she'd always shown to protecting our workers' rights and ensuring our projects met the highest ethical standards. And the community center in Evanston, Trent's financing proposal was approved yesterday. We break ground next month. Trent had become our chief financial officer. His experience with both legitimate and illegitimate financial practices made him uniquely qualified to spot potential corruption before it could take root. His recovery was stronger than ever, and our relationship had evolved from professional partnership to something much deeper. "Any word from Julian about the school renovation?" "He's presenting the final plans to the school board tomorrow. They love the sustainable design elements, and the budget came in 15% under projection. Julian had joined us as head of architectural development, finally able to work on projects that prioritize safety and community benefit over profit margins. His reputation had been fully restored, and several other firms had tried to poach him. But he stayed with us, he said, because we were building something that mattered. The phone rang, and my assistant announced that Rosa Martinez was on the line. Aunt Eloise. Rosa's voice was bright with excitement. I got into Northwestern, full scholarship. Rosa had thrived in the stable environment Lucia and I had created for her. Her rebellious streak had been channeled into activism and academic excellence. She was planning to study journalism with a focus on investigative reporting. I'm going to expose corrupt people just like you did, she told me the previous summer. But I'm going to do it with words instead of lawsuits. As I hung up the phone, Trent appeared in my doorway with 2 cups of coffee and the newspaper. Thought you might want to see this, he said, pointing to a small item on the business page. Disgraced former CEO Crispin Wren sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The article described how my brother had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. He would spend the next decade and a half in a very different kind of cage than the one he'd tried to keep me in. Victor had avoided prison due to his age and failing health, but he lost everything else. The Wren Group had been dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to victims of their crimes. He lived now in a modest assisted living facility, his empire reduced to a single room and whatever dignity he could salvage from the wreckage of his reputation. Celeste had simply disappeared. One day she was preparing for her own criminal trial, the next she was gone, probably to some non-extradition country with whatever money she'd managed to hide from federal investigators. Part of me wondered if I'd ever see her again. Part of me hoped I wouldn't. Any regrets? Trent asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I considered the question seriously. In the past year I'd gone from being a disowned daughter sleeping in a motel to running my own company, surrounded by people who loved and respected me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. I'd helped send criminals to prison, provided homes for families who needed them, and created jobs for people who'd been discarded by the old system. But I'd also destroyed the only family I'd ever known, even if they'd never truly been family in any meaningful sense. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just married Rami and played my role, I admitted, whether all this pain could have been avoided. You know what would have happened, Trent said gently. You would have spent your life as someone else's asset instead of your own person, and all their crimes would have continued, hurting more people. I know. It's just, they were my family. That has to mean something, doesn't it? Family isn't who shares your DNA, Eloise. It's who shows up for you when everything falls apart, who sees your worth even when you can't see it yourself, who fights for you and with you and believes in the person you're becoming. He was right. Of course my real family was Lucia and Rosa, Julian and Gareth, the employees who trusted me to do right by them, even Rami, who'd sent a congratulations card when Wren Rebuild was featured on the cover of Architectural Digest. That afternoon I drove to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. I visited her grave every few months, usually when I needed to remember why I'd started this fight in the first place. I kept your necklace, I told her headstone, touching the silver pendant at my throat. It reminds me that someone in this family knew how to love without conditions. The wind rustled through the oak trees she'd helped plant when the cemetery was first established. Eleanor Wren had believed in leaving the world better than she'd found it, even if she'd been too afraid in her lifetime to fully stand up to the corruption around her. But she'd given me the tools and the courage to do what she couldn't. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment my heart stopped. Was it Celeste, reaching out from whatever exile she'd chosen, some final threat or manipulation? Instead it was a message from a young woman in Seattle whose family had been cheated by a construction company with connections to corrupt city officials. She'd read about my story and wanted to know if I had any advice for someone trying to expose powerful people who seemed untouchable. I called her immediately. The first thing you need to understand, I told her, is that they're only powerful as long as people are afraid to challenge them. The second thing is that you can't do it alone. Find allies, document everything, and remember that the truth has a power they can't buy or intimidate. But what if they try to destroy me? They will try. But here's what they don't understand: when you've got nothing left to lose, you become incredibly dangerous. And when you've got people who love you fighting beside you, you become unstoppable. That evening I stood in my apartment, the same modest place I'd moved to after leaving home, though I could afford much better now. I'd kept it as a reminder of who I'd become when stripped of everything I'd thought defined me. On my mantel sat a framed photo from the Ren Rebuild holiday party, me surrounded by my employees and their families, Rosa making bunny ears behind my head, Lucia laughing at something Julian had said, Trent's arm around my shoulders. We looked like what we were, a chosen family bound together by shared values and mutual respect. Next to it was the last letter I'd received from Rami, now happily married to a woman he'd chosen himself and running a legitimate shipping business that employed hundreds of people in Syria and Lebanon. You taught me that some chains are meant to be broken, he'd written. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. I walked to my bathroom mirror, the same one where I'd practiced the perfect smile for so many years as a child. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who'd been groomed to be a business asset. She had laugh lines around her eyes, calloused hands from working construction sites, and a confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she stood for. This is who I really am, I said to my reflection, echoing the words I'd spoken at the end of that first terrible night in the motel. But now they meant something different. Then I'd been lost and afraid, trying to convince myself I could survive on my own. Now I was celebrating the woman I'd chosen to become. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Lucia. Emergency board meeting, she said with mock seriousness. Rosa's making dinner for everyone tomorrow night, and she wants to know if Trent's allergic to shellfish. This is what you're calling an emergency? Have you seen Rosa cook? This could be a matter of life and death. I laughed, feeling the warmth of being part of something bigger than myself. Tell her Trent will eat whatever she makes and be grateful for it. Already did. See you tomorrow night, and Eloise, bring the good wine. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Another week of being free. Another week of building something that matters. Another week of proving that they were wrong about who you could become. After she hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, families were living in homes we'd built. Workers were earning fair wages on our construction sites. And young people like Rosa were learning that it was possible to challenge corruption and win. They tried to write me out of the story, to make me disappear when I wouldn't play the role they'd assigned me. But I'd become the author of my own life instead. And this was just the beginning.